the news tonight, a 10-year blueprint defining national economic and social policies is launched during a ceremony led by His Majesty the King. A 5-day ceasefire in Yemen is expected to begin tomorrow, and an F-16 jet from the Saudi-led coalition goes missing. And Malaysia detains hundreds of refugees after authorities rescue hundreds stranded off Indonesia. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. His Majesty the King patronizes a ceremony to launch a 10-year plan that defines a general framework for the national economic and social policies and aims at achieving comprehensive and sustainable development and ensuring rule of law. The Jordan 2025 blueprint includes 3 executive programs which cover 3 stages from now and until 2025. It seeks to achieve national social and economic objectives in a measurable manner and will be flexible to amendment according to priorities. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour handed the Jordan 2025 vision document during a ceremony attended by Her Majesty Queen Rania. King Abdullah had ordered the drawing up of the 10-year economic blueprint in a letter to the Prime Minister. Mansour said the government was keen on devising a participatory way of work in executing Jordan 2025 blueprint. During a press conference he held to announce the 10-year strategy, Mansour stressed that the blueprint is measurable and flexible to amendment according to priorities.
Today, we look forward to the next 10 years. We will revise the plan once every 3 years, or probably earlier, because fundamental change might occur that would alter the process. We are to a large extent affected by the conditions in the region, due to our location in the region and the circumstances around us, and due to our size in terms of population and economy, which together double the impact.
Jordan categorically denied reports that U.S. troops had been posted on its border with Syria. The Jordan Armed Forces Arab Army Command said not a single soldier, either from the U.S. or any other nationality, has been deployed on Jordan borders with Syria or any of the kingdom's border with neighboring countries. It reiterated that the armed forces are capable of protecting the kingdom's frontier and deal with any threat wherever it comes from. A Moroccan F16 warplane has gone missing while on a mission with Saudi-led forces in Yemen. Yemen's Houthi rebels said regional tribesmen shot down the aircraft. A 5-day ceasefire in Yemen is expected to begin tomorrow, offering much-needed food and medical supplies for civilians caught in zones of conflict. The humanitarian ceasefire proposed last week by the Saudi foreign minister was accepted by the forces allied to the Houthi rebels. Here's an update.
A temporary ceasefire is due to take hold in Yemen tomorrow. The truce would allow ships to reach Yemeni ports and enable some nations to deliver humanitarian assistance. Saudi Arabia has warned that the truce depends on the Houthis abiding by that deal. The Houthis' political council has said they would like to see aid delivered to the Yemeni people as soon as possible. Here in the southern port of Aden, basic necessities are in short supply. Residents of Aden have begun the tough task of cleaning up after weeks of street battles between Houthi rebels and loyalists to exiled President Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi.
These young men are now starting to clean this neighborhood of rubbish, and there is a return to normal life in Dar Saad. We hope that our brothers in charge of relief rush to aid our citizens. What we lack is aid and relief, and we thank Operation Decisive Storm and the return of hope and King Salman.
A group of 17 international aid agencies questioned the duration of the ceasefire, saying 5 days is not enough to provide relief to the country. As the conflict goes on in many areas, the Houthis claim to have shot down a coalition aircraft, a development that could scupper the ceasefire. The Moroccan Royal Armed Forces confirmed in a statement that one of its F16 fighter jets taking part in the Yemen air raids had gone missing. It was unclear what happened to the pilot. A day before the proposed ceasefire, Houthi fighters and Saudi forces traded heavy artillery and rocket fire across the border. Katyusha rockets and mortars were fired on the Saudi cities of Jizan and Najran after the Saudis hit Sada and Hajjah provinces with more than 150 rockets. Saudi Arabia's Civil Defense Department said one Saudi Arabian was killed in the shelling in Najran, and another Saudi national and 3 foreigners were injured. The Saudi-led coalition also struck positions of the Iranian-backed Houthis in the central city of Taiz and in the oil-producing Ma'rib province east of the capital Sana'a. A large explosion also was witnessed in Nuqum mountain overlooking Sana'a after Saudi-led airstrikes targeted military bases and weapons stores. The explosion that is thought to have been at a missile store in the Houthi-controlled capital Sana'a set off repeated blasts on the mountainside. Loy Bakar for the news at 10.
The White House said Saudi Arabia had not raised any concerns about the agenda for an upcoming regional summit hosted by President Barack Obama at Camp David. It said no Saudi concerns were made before or after the Saudi king changed plans and decided not to attend the summit. White House spokesman Josh Earnest said the United States is confident that the Saudi officials who are coming would be able to represent their country and implement any decisions made during the meetings. Earnest also said Obama had not spoken to Saudi Arabia's King Salman, but is likely to have an opportunity to do so before the summit. U.S.-led forces targeted Daesh militants in Syria with 9 airstrikes from Sunday morning through this morning and conducted another 9 strikes against the group in Iraq. The U.S. military said most of the Syrian strikes hit targets near Al-Hasakeh, where they destroyed Daesh fighting positions, vehicles, mortar positions, heavy machine guns, and a supply point. In the ongoing civil war, Syrian opposition fighters battled for control of Qalamun amid reports of opposition gains in Idlib province. Lebanon Hezbollah militia sent fighters on an offensive along the eastern border with Syria, fighting alongside government forces to dislodge opposition fighters from strongholds in the mountainous area. Battles erupted between Hezbollah fighters and Syrian troops on one side and the opposition fighters on another in the strategic town of Qalamun. A UK-based activist network said opposition fighters entered a facility in Jisr al-Shughur, the provincial capital of Idlib, the rest of which they captured almost 2 weeks ago. Iraq's government began training tribal fighters in the western province of Anbar in an urgent U.S.-backed initiative to stem recent advances by Daesh militants. These setbacks in Anbar exposed the need for trusted and equipped Sunni fighters to help turn momentum against Daesh and dry up the extremist pool of potential recruits. More than 1,000 recruits, mostly from the Abu Isa tribe of Amirat al-Fallujah, took marching orders last Friday as local officials cheered them on its beaches. Elsewhere in the province at the Habbaniya Air Base, bare buildings were being outfitted to host training there too. Many of the officials at the ceremony said they believe Sunni tribal fighters against Daesh was just beginning. Malaysia detained more than 1,000 Bangladeshi and Rohingya refugees, including dozens of children, a day after authorities rescued hundreds stranded off Indonesia's western tip. There has been a huge increase in refugees from Bangladesh and Myanmar drifting on boats to Malaysia and Indonesia in recent days. Thailand, usually the first destination in the region to smuggle people, has announced a crackdown on the trafficking. Here's more.
Hundreds of Rohingya and Bangladeshi migrants rest at a shelter in Aceh, Indonesia on Monday. They are just some of the nearly 600 people rescued by a fisherman a day earlier after their overcrowded wooden boats ran out of fuel. Officials believe the group left Thailand about 7 days ago. Some died on the journey. Of those who made it, around 50 were treated for starvation at a hospital, officials said. Since 2012, more than 100,000 stateless Rohingya Muslims have fled violence and poverty in Myanmar. According to a UN agency, about 25,000 Rohingyas and Bangladeshis boarded people smugglers' boats in the first 3 months of this year, twice as many during the same period last year. An agency official estimated that around 300 people had died at sea in the first quarter of this year as a result of starvation, dehydration, and abuse by boat crews.
At the United Nations European Union Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini urged the Security Council to act immediately to save the lives of refugees and migrants who try to enter the EU by sea. According to the UN Refugee Agency, around 1,800 migrants have perished during the crossing already this year. Some 51,000 have entered Europe by sea, with 30,500 coming via Italy, fleeing war and poverty in Asia, Africa and the Middle East. EU leaders agreed last month to destroy vessels before they are used by traffickers, and the 28-nation bloc wants UN authorization for its operation.
Let me explicitly assure you that no refugees or migrants intercepted at sea will be sent back against their will. Their rights under Geneva Conventions will be fully honored.
British Prime Minister David Cameron said renegotiating the country's relationship with the European Union would be tough. But Cameron said his decisive election victory last week had given him a mandate for negotiations with the bloc. Cameron, who won a surprise outright majority last week, has promised to renegotiate Britain's EU ties before holding an in-out EU membership referendum by the end of 2017. Completing his cabinet reshuffle, Cameron named Greg Hands as Chief Secretary to the Treasury, giving him a key role in the government's renewed push to cut spending and bring down the budget deficit. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage, the leader of the anti-EU UKIP party, withdrew his resignation after tendering it last week over his failure to win a seat at the British Parliament. French President François Hollande urged an end to the U.S. trade embargo of Cuba. He also said, as he began a visit to Cuba, the first by a French head of state, that he saw a larger French role in Cuba's engagement with the West. Cuba is in talks with both the European Union and the United States amid intense world interest in Cuba following rapprochement with Washington in December. Hollande, traveling with a host of French business executives, is the first serving Western European leader to visit Cuba in 29 years. He said he expected others to soon follow his example. The French leader was scheduled to meet Cuban President Raúl Castro, deliver a speech and participate in an economic forum in Cuba as part of his trip in the Caribbean. Heavy rains and strong winds flattened houses as Typhoon Null crashed into the northeastern tip of the Philippines. The National Disaster Agency said at least 2 people were killed and thousands of evacuees were yet to find out if their houses are still standing. Null made landfall in the rice and corn producing provinces of Cagayan, north of the capital, Manila. Near its center, the typhoon brought winds of 160 kilometers per hour and even stronger gusts. The storm has since been downgraded to a Category 4 from a Category 5 as it makes its way towards southern Japan. Some 20 typhoons cross the Philippines on average each year, but in recent years the storms have become increasingly fierce. Thousands of eager participants dived headfirst into the mud on the last of 3 days of the annual Mud Day obstacle course outside Paris. The Mud Day challenge consists of a 13-kilometer course in a military camp west of the French capital. The course contains 20 combat-inspired obstacles, including crawling through mud, sliding down a water slide into a pool of muddy water, and rope climbing above a pool of ice-cold water. Many said that despite the physical difficulty of the course, the atmosphere made the experience memorable. The annual Mud Day race and obstacle course started in Paris in 2013. This year's race saw an estimated 25,000 participants. Britain's Mark Cavendish raced into and win in the opening stage of the Tour of California in Sacramento. Riding for the Essex Quick Step team, Cavendish finished the 203-kilometer stage in 4 hours, 43 minutes and 27 seconds. Takeoff Saxo rider Peter Sagan finished second overall, with Jean-Pierre Drucker of BMC Racing taking the final spot of the podium. The 8-stage race now heads to the town of Nevada City for the start of today's second stage, finishing in the town of Lodi, 193 kilometers away. And the weather outlook: a bit cool across highlands and fair in much of the country tonight, with some clouds appearing at various altitudes. Tomorrow, mild conditions are forecast in many regions and relatively hot in the Jordan Valley and in the ports of Aqaba, with westerly brisk winds turning dusty in the Badia. Aqaba should expect northerly to southerly moderate winds picking up at times, and the seas will be choppy. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. And to end the news, here's a recap of our top stories. A 10-year blueprint defining national economic and social policies is launched during a ceremony led by His Majesty the King. A 5-day ceasefire in Yemen is expected to begin tomorrow, and an F16 jet from the Saudi-led coalition goes missing. And Malaysia detains hundreds of refugees after authorities rescue hundreds stranded off Indonesia. And with this we come to an end. I'm Farah Ajlouni. Thank you for watching. Have a good night.